Welcome to Transform Transformational, a Teach Beyond podcast. I'm Kian.
And I'm Heather. We're here to explore what it means to be transformed in our own lives and how that overflows to living lives of transformational impact in our communities.
And we are back in a new year. Hello, 2025.
Yes, Happy New Year.
Heather, I'm so curious. We probably ask this every year, but do you have any New Year's traditions that you do each year?
That's funny. I think we have talked about maybe goal setting and things like that in the past. But what comes to mind in terms of traditions is that I typically do like appetizers, like small bits of a meal over the course of time because you're just like up longer. Even if I'm not with a lot of people, it's like you kind of want to nibble throughout the evening as you're getting closer to midnight. And I do try to stay up till midnight, even if I'm not like, out doing something. It's just, nice to have a little bit here and there. So I think appetizers or hors d'oeuvres, whatever you want to call them, that tends to be the tradition itself. And then just different people to celebrate with, whether it's family or friends or whatever. So what about you?
We don't do New Year's resolutions or anything like that, but we've started making goals each year, which I think I've
Yeah.
mentioned before.
Yes. Yeah, I remember
But
that.
we've started to extending them to our kids. And so this
Oh,
year,
nice.
one of the big goals that they had was the oldest one wanted to build a campfire and light it. And the youngest one just wanted to light it. They were fine not building it. So that was their goal. And I'm happy to report that they did successfully complete their goal over the past year.
Oh, that is such a fun goal. I love that. I love that you're including them in thinking about, okay, what could this new year look like and what do they want to do? Do you know where this campfire goal came from in particular? Like had they seen you build a fire and they wanted to do it too, or did they just feel like
Yeah.
your family didn't have enough campfires in it or
We built lots of campfires. So
Okay.
they were always told they could not light the fire
Ah,
until they're older and more mature, more responsible.
sure.
And so this, I guess, was the year they obviously must have been more mature. So they
Maybe they're still proving the responsibility part, but at least they got to light the fire this year.
exactly.
Oh, that's great. Well, today on the podcast, we have Katy Boatman, who is the author of two devotional books for preteens called You Can Rest and You Can Trust. Katy is the content manager and co-host of Single Purpose League with Annie F. Downs and worked for 6 years with If Gathering and Jenny Allen. Prior to that, Katy spent almost 8 years in Christian publishing.
Katy lives in Nashville, Tennessee with her mini golden doodle. She has spent 16 years mentoring girls through student ministry, and she is passionate about helping them understand who God is and reminding them that they are not alone. She is a volunteer and a board member for the Teen Dream Center in Nashville.
Today, we're going to be talking with Katy about serving preteens, thinking about the topics of anxiety and worry. Whether you're a parent of a preteen, a teacher working with this age group, or anyone investing in the lives of young people, we hope this conversation will be a helpful framework for entering conversations about these topics.
So let's go over to that conversation with Katy now.
Welcome to the podcast, Katy.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here with you guys.
Thanks so much, Katy. We are very excited to have you here.
So, Katy, you and I don't have kids of our own, but we're both aunts, and I love finding other aunts who have that in common with me. I proudly talk about my nephews on the podcast here all the time, and just welcomed a niece into the world. So, and also, all of us are investing in the lives of kids of all different ages. So, we'd love to hear from you, Katy. What does that look like for you? What does it mean to be invested in kids' lives for you? How have you seen that grow and change over the years?
Yeah, well, first of all, I also love being an aunt. At some point, I feel like I had to clarify on my Instagram that these are not my actual children because
Absolutely, yes.
most of my pictures are of my nieces and nephews. So
I love that.
it's just the best. But yeah, student ministry has been a part of my life for 17 plus years now.
Uh-huh.
And it's one of those things where after college, I was really feeling that pull to kind of lean in and help lead high schoolers and middle schoolers. And I always thought, I bet I will outgrow this at some point. I bet this just makes sense because I'm a few years ahead of these
Sure.
students. And now I'm 37 and I have not outgrown just a heart for the next generation. And so it's looked different every season of, what it is to kind of lean in and help lead. Some seasons it's been having a couple girls come over for a Bible study. some seasons it's been helping with youth groups at my church, helping lead a small group or helping mentor a couple of girls. And some seasons it's been working on resources for
Mm, mhm,
kids. And so that's really where two books have come into play. And then currently, I am part of an organization called the Teen Dream Center, which here in Nashville is a mentoring and discipleship program for under resourced students.
mhm,
And so I have a student that I work with who's 15. And what's so funny and interesting to me over all these years, my hope is that they've learned something from me. My hope is that they have found out more about Jesus through me, but I have learned just as much as
mhm,
anybody. And so I constantly am learning from them and learning about, what it's like to be a teenager in 2024 because it's not the same as when
sure,
I was growing up.
yeah.
So it has just been a joy and like a lifeline for me, honestly, to get to be a part of students' lives. And it's just something I really love to do.
I love it. And you've mentioned that you created these two resources, and that's kind of what we're here to talk about today. And have you always seen yourself as an author, as somebody who's going to create these types of tools for kids? And how did this come about for you to write You Can Rest and You Can Trust?
Honestly, I never saw myself as an author. And even growing up, I knew that I enjoyed writing, but I almost didn't even know to dream about being a writer because
Mm,
I grew up in a smaller town. And so I didn't know anybody who was an author or a writer
mhm,
as their job. So I just thought, well, this is just like something I enjoy, but it's not going to be a thing. And as I got into college, was definitely taking more classes that was around writing and communications and all of
mm,
that kind of stuff. And it wasn't until I was post college, I was working in the Christian publishing industry. And I was doing that just because I kind of happened into it. And I was working on the marketing side of things and really started to enjoy that. But I was also working on marketing projects where it would require me to do a lot of writing. Like you're
mm,
writing copy for a website, you're writing copy for social media, you're helping write a video script. And I was like, man, I really do like this part of it, And I was obviously learning a lot about writing and publishing by being in that industry. And so I think my wheels did start turning at that point of like, maybe I could write a book someday, but it still felt like a someday conversation.
mhm, mhm,
And then it was in 2020 when things were crazy and we were all at home. And my niece, my oldest niece, was getting ready to turn 10 at the time.
mhm,
And I really wanted to give her a special birthday gift that year. And
mhm,
I was trying to think about what to do. And I was on the phone with my mom one day processing this. And she was like, she's really mentioned that she loves to have something to read at night to calm her mind because she's having trouble falling asleep.
mm,
And I thought, well, first of all, that kind of breaks my heart that she's about to turn 10 and she's having trouble falling asleep because that
mm,
it feels like such an adult thing. We
mm,
get that. But I'm like, man, I don't like that she's struggling with that. And so I thought, well, I could write her a little something, and
mm.
that could be her birthday gift. And so I started writing just a 10-day devotional. I thought 10 devotions for her 10th birthday.
Yes, yes.
And at the last minute before giving it to her, I was like, well, I wonder if I put this up on Amazon, like self publish it, would any of my friends and family be interested in this for kids too? And so that's really how it turned into a thing. Like I gave it to her,
Mm,
I printed out a copy for her, and that was really fun and special. But then some of my publishing friends that I had worked with previously reached out and they were like, hey, we want to talk about this. And so
mm,
we sat down and decided to turn it into 100-day devotional. And that's how
mhm,
You Can Rest, which is for preteen girls, came about. And so it's really just been one of those things that kind of fell into my lap.
mm,
And yet it's been such a me and God project because as we worked on it, I say we because literally, as I would sit down to write, there were days where I'm like, I don't have the words, I don't,
mhm,
I'm feeling worried and anxious too. And so, how do I help lead them in this? But I think what's made You Can Rest and You Can Trust, which is the boy version, special is that it truly was a project that started for my niece Shelby and for my nephew
Mm,
Blake.
mm,
And so to sit down and write with just them in mind
mm,
made it really personal and really special. And then it's just been a gift that it's helped serve other
mhm.
kids as well.
Man, that personal connection really is such a tender place to be writing from and to have that vision for the one who will read it. And any book is going to be then picked up by individuals anywhere, right? So it's still their own personal story and what they're bringing to that book as they read it. But sometimes it can be hard to imagine the reader on the other end if you don't have that to start with. So that's really beautiful. And I imagine that's how you decided that it was going to be for this age group that you were targeting as you were writing. What do you think about that, the 8 to 12 age bracket that comes to your mind as you think about, targeting that demographic with these two books? Obviously, it was your niece at the time and your nephew, but what else comes to mind for kind of that age range?
Yeah, it's such a range of exploration those years, because they're
Mm,
so transitional too. It's like you're often going from you're going from elementary school to middle school,
mhm,
somewhere in that gap. And so there's so much transition and learning and
mhm,
discovering, and your body starts to change, your emotions start to change, you're
mhm,
questioning things more.
mhm,
And so, what I found in writing these is that there's actually not a ton of resources for that 8 to 12-year-old age
mm.
range. There's a lot of kids' books, as we know, for
Uh-huh.
like littles. And then there's resources for like teen and above. And often teens can read up, they can read adult
Mhm,
um, content too. And so, what I discovered by working with, my publishing team was there's just not a ton for
mm,
that kind of middle range. And so, that kind of fired me up even more of like, okay, well, then like, let's really make this happen. And I was super intentional about talking to kids in that age range as I worked on the book. And so I pulled together my niece and her group of friends when I
mm,
worked on the book for girls, and I pulled together my nephew and his group of friends when I worked on the book for boys. And I asked them, what are the things that you're worrying about? And what are the things that keep you up at night? And also, like, what are the things that help you calm down and bring you peace? And so they were so gracious to let me ask all those questions, and I wrote everything down. And I truly took their answers as a starting place for
mm,
the daily topics throughout the devotionals, just so that I
mm,
was speaking from actual experience of things they were going through and not just me guessing, this is what I
mhm,
think they're worrying
mhm,
about.
That's so interesting, especially because you do talk about some really heavy topics,
mhm,
depression, anxiety, and fear, and just it's surprising and kind of sad how much those are greatly impacting teens and preteens today. And I feel like some kids might have the language to label those things with that. Other kids might not realize that's kind of what they're dealing with, and we might just think of it as acting out or something else, or just disobeying when it's really there's something else deeper at the root. Can you talk to us about what you've learned about this as you've worked on these books, as you've seen them released, as you've interacted with kids in your life? What is like kind of giving them a label, a category as they think about these things?
Yeah, well, you're exactly right that so often emotions are coming out and there's a root thing happening underneath, especially what I learned about boys as I was digging into just some research. I was reading David Thomas's book on raising boys, and I realized that so often when a young boy is angry or really agitated, at the root of that is a big emotion. And a lot of times it's fear or anxiety. And I've seen that play out in my nephew's life. And so, number one, just the awareness of that is so important. And I think being able to then sit with kids and ask, hey, what's going on here? What are you really feeling is super important, and something that I was not aware of growing up either. And so just, yeah, that general awareness I think is super helpful. And then to mention David Thomas and Sissy Goff as well, like they're my counseling heroes of
Yeah.
this age group.
Yeah.
They often say when they're talking about the statistics that 1 in 4 kids is dealing with anxiety.
Mm, mhm,
And to think about actually writing the first book, You Can Rest, in the middle of the pandemic, all
mm,
I could think about was how are these stats going to change, as the
yeah,
years
yeah.
continue? And obviously, we've seen that play out now. I even think to some of my teacher friends work a lot with kindergartners, and the kindergarten class that's come this year, that's
Mm,
started in like the 2024 school year, they have kind of noticed some differences in the
uh,
kindergarten class. And it's because they were like tiny babies in
yeah,
COVID. So, all that to say is the stats are not great.
yeah.
And we're dealing with an anxious generation.
Mhm,
And so, to be aware of it is important, but to also help them navigate what they're truly feeling is really important. And I mean, it's even simple things of like a feelings chart, that
mhm,
if
mhm,
if we as adults go to counseling, it's often like, "Hey, what's the feeling on the chart that we're starting
mhm,
with today?" And I think something that simple to sit with a 12-year-old, an 18-year-old, whoever, and
mhm.
say, "Where are we starting at today? Like what's the root feeling?" is really important to kind of dig into what's going on.
Let's take a short break for a story from the field.
My name is Katie, and I'm located in the Dominican Republic. Over the past 6 or so years at Arbor Christian Academy, I've watched our students grow and graduate from our K through 6 school. Having taught a lot of them, I often hear back from them to share new experiences, curiosities. They share about their social pressures, identity issues, sometimes that pressing need to be or feel cool. But this year, as I've heard from them, I see God doing something big with me and with where they're at. God knows these teens, they belong to Him, and I'm seeing a warfare rage in front of me. As I prayed, I felt a tug from God to go deeper by hosting a Bible study at my home for our alumni girls. So now, for some of them, we spend every Monday together, slowly making our way through Armor of God by Priscilla Shire, which is no surprise that they made that selection given the battles that they've been facing. And this is what I love about teaching. It's the time and the ongoing discipleship in different stages of life. I think about how I once had that time spent with them in the classroom, and now I get to be with them every week in my living room, catching up, laughing, praying for each other, diving into truth. And as this battle becomes clearer, these girls are gaining confidence that they're not fighting alone. More than ever, I've seen them opening up and asking big life questions, and I believe that this will lead them to stand even more firm, that there is a chief of battle, and that chief of battle will be their reward.
For our weekly spotlight this week, we are focusing on the International School of the Caucasus. If you'd like to learn more about this school, click on the link in the show notes or visit teachbeyond.org/go.
And now back to the conversation with Katie.
I'm thinking about these titles, even the phrase "you can rest and you can trust." As I hear that as an adult, it is such a comforting thought, as such a foundational reminder of our foundation being in Christ and the reality that we can have that confidence because of our relationship with Jesus, that we can rest in him and we can trust him. And yet those phrases can seem simplistic when there are these big feelings, or they're wrestling with something that feels really, they have a big feeling about it. We know these titles aren't just trite responses, they're deep truths. But what does it look like to help an 8 to 12-year-old, an adolescent, walking through these feelings, to acknowledge their fear and anxiety without just glossing over it and saying it will be okay and everything's going to be fine, but also these are true things that we want them to know and get deep down inside. So what does that look like? How can we approach that conversation?
I think as I wrote, one of the things that I really wanted to make sure was clear with both books is that God is right there with them. And so if you say, well, I feel really scared about this test that I have to take tomorrow, or I feel really scared because there's bad weather coming tonight and I've experienced this before, I've seen it on the news, and I'm scared about what could happen with this storm, that, like we said, number one, acknowledging the feeling is super important. And so just validating that, like, yeah, that's real and that's okay. And I might be feeling that too. But reminding them that they're not alone, I think, is one of the most important things. That, number one, that they have caring adults in their lives, but also that there is a God that truly is with them, that's going to go to school with them, that's going to be with them in their room when they're scared at night because they're by themselves. And I think it's I think it's just one of those monumental things that when it clicks with us, that truly, like, our God, our Father, is right here. He is right here with us. It takes away some of that vulnerability feeling of I am completely alone in this, and just reminds you that He's ultimately in control. And so when we say the phrase "you can rest and you can trust," my hope is that to these kids, it is a reminder that they're not alone, that God is with them, and that He does have a plan.
Mhm.
And as an adult, I have to be reminded of that too.
Totally. Yeah, this is not just for kids, but learning how to enter into that with them,
Yes.
knowing that we can experience this too. It's so helpful to think through.
As we talk about the books, You Can Trust and You Can Rest, You Can Trust is structured with what if questions, and You Can Rest tackles specific worries. I'm curious about the what if questions. What kind of inspired you to use that as your structure? Does that help kids kind of enter into the situation, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I wrote You Can Rest, I took just the worries that my niece and her friends had told me about and literally listed them out in a spreadsheet and started tackling those one by one. Okay, what does scripture say about this?
Mm,
What promise do we have from God that we can rest in?
mhm,
And then
mhm,
the what if questions for the book for boys, You Can Trust, came from the fact that boys are so curious. And so what I
mm,
found is that they were often asking a lot of questions. And some days those questions truly were just rooted in general curiosity. But a lot of times those questions are actually rooted in worry and anxiety.
mm,
And I saw that play out time and time again, just hanging out with these boys. And so that's why I decided, okay, let's form the daily devotionals and You Can Trust as what if questions, because often that's what they're asking. And so it was the same format of me then taking that to scripture and saying, what does God say about these questions? What does truth say? What's the promise here?
mhm, mhm.
But the root of those what ifs were really a lot of worry.
I think that makes so much sense. I have a 8-year-old boy, and he definitely loves questions. And I think if I were to kind of just read
Mm,
to him like a piece of information, he might not take it, but a question will definitely intrigue
Right.
him and keep him engaged. As you work through all these different topics, how did you decide which ones to include in the book? Was 100 a stretch, or was it like, hey, there's like 300 I could pick and I have to limit it somehow?
Yeah. There were, I would say there was probably 75 that were like, yep, these are easy, these have come out easy. And then the last 25 or so, it was a lot of like, okay, what am I missing? Is there something
mhm,
that we haven't thought about? And so I did a lot of texting with moms too, of being
mm.
like, all right, what are your kids saying this week? What are they coming home from school?
That's
What
cool.
are they talking about? And really it was, yeah, it was through a lot of just those kind of questions with parents and um, other friends who are in student ministry that we
Mhm,
came up with the full 100. But to answer your question about what to include and what to not, there were definitely some where, as a publishing team, we had to talk about, are we planting an idea if we put a question about, especially things like school shootings and stuff like that, where it's a reality now, but also you don't want to plant a fear in their mind if they haven't gotten there yet, if they haven't
Mhm.
seen it on the news or haven't thought about it. And so we had to navigate that really carefully, and still included some topics in there about what if bad things happen at school, and and storms, because that has been real. But truthfully, as I talked to my niece and nephew and thought about the things that they've lived through, unfortunately, they've lived through a lot of traumatic events, especially living in a big city like Nashville. I mean, not only did they live through COVID, but there has now been, a local school shooting here. There has been a bombing on Christmas Day. There was a tornado that really wrecked our
Mhm.
city. And the truth is that they're dealing with a lot of anxiety because of those things.
Mhm.
And so it is a fine line of how do we address what they're feeling without taking them to a place of like, let me tell you all the scary things that are happening on the news.
Yeah.
And I think it's a case by case thing with kids, that it kind of depends on what the kid has seen and struggled with. But with the book, I was very mindful to try to be careful with the language that was used, and to not completely plant ideas in their
Mhm.
heads.
That's so interesting, especially the age group you're dealing with.
Yeah,
There's kids who it's a very transitional period. So one year from the next, they've learned a whole bunch more, they've experienced more,
Yeah.
and so that's tricky to navigate.
I'm thinking about how many of the students that um, are taught around the world are either, experiencing the being uprooted and moving, and then maybe spending a year in their passport country and going back to where their parents are working, and so they have that like transiency and maybe a lack of stability sometimes, or are living in places where they're seeing poverty or they're seeing world events. And so just what you're talking about, Katie, is really relevant, that it's going to be really different from one environment to another, exactly what they have to trust God through and for.
yeah,
But the promise there is still true, that they can trust him and that he is with them wherever they are. And so I love how I really appreciate the sensitivity and thought that went into recognizing that different kids are not only going to have different um, awarenesses of that, but also they are going to have different things that they're walking through. And, one kid might experience a lot more trauma than another, and they both might wrestle with anxiety and wondering if they can trust God. So I really appreciate that thought. I hadn't thought about the planting idea as part of that, but
yeah,
it transcends then the specifics when this is the foundational principle that we see in scripture and that we know is true of God.
right, absolutely.
Yeah. As you've been working on these books, have you experienced personal transformation in your own life through the process of both writing the books, but then also releasing them into the world and having people engage with them and kind of get responses from that?
Yeah, I had often heard authors say that you end up living what it is that you're writing, and I was like, that won't be true for these books.
They're for
These are
kids.
exactly. And it ended up being pretty true. When I was writing You Can Rest, that was a season where I experienced more anxiety than I have in other parts of my life. And it wasn't necessarily because of the book, it was a lot of circumstantial things. But I had to take the truth of what I was writing and really live it out and be like, is this true for me? Because I was, often waking up in the middle of the night, racing thoughts, really asking God, why is everything changing so quickly every single day? And that is a topic in both books about why is everything changing all the time. So yes, I definitely grew with the Lord. It was a testing time for me too. And one of the things that I ended up really leaning on was Psalm 23:1. I know we often can quote Psalm 23, but it hit me differently in this season. And the CSB version says, "The Lord is my shepherd; I have what I need." And so I would wake up every day and be like, "The Lord is my shepherd; I have what I need. The Lord is my shepherd; I have what I need." And I still say that a ton because it was just one of those things where, because of riding in the middle of the COVID season, we didn't know what we were waking up to every single day. It was like, what's the rule today? What's the um how much is it spreading today? Like, what are we being asked to do, and all of that. And so, yeah, it was definitely stretching to write both of these. And I'm grateful that I got to do it. And I'm grateful for the way that it grew my faith with God in those seasons too.
So as we're entering a brand new year, 2025, it's kind of crazy to think it's a new year. Um, that can bring up anxieties. Maybe it's about the things that we didn't accomplish. We've taken time over the last few days, weeks to look at the goals we had and realize we've fallen short of what we wanted to do. Or maybe it's just looking ahead, being nervous about what's coming this year, something that we know, or the theoretical of what we don't know, the things that could happen. So, we've recognized that these messages are not just for kids; it's for all of us to hold on to. We can rest and we can trust Jesus. So, what do these messages mean for us as we enter a new year, 2025?
Yeah, why is it that a new year just kind of sends us on a on a spiral sometimes?
Yeah.
It's sometimes refreshing because it feels like a clean slate, and sometimes it's overwhelming because it feels like, well, what did we do last year and how did we get through that? I would say as we step into this year, it may feel like just having this on repeat, but a reminder that God truly is in control, because I can't look at social media or turn on the news without being like, what in the world is happening? And from it doesn't matter what it is, but you're just like, what's happening? And so I have to bring my mind back to, okay, God, what are you doing? Instead of, what is the world telling me? What is it that you're doing? And what is your plan here? And thankfully, we have the story. We have scripture in front of us. And so we know where this thing is headed. We know how the story ends. But that takes a daily kind of surrender to self and a daily reminder that God is good, that God is with us, and that He's in control. And so, as I step into this new year, like just as an adult, but also as someone who wants to continue to help kids and teenagers in that is what I would continue to lean on. God is with us, He's in control, and you're not alone.
Love it. That is a great note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us, Katy. We have one last question before we actually let you go completely. So that is a question we ask all of our guests, and that's, what is one thing that's changing your life right now? So this can be something really big and dramatic, or something small that is changing your life but isn't huge. So I'll go first, and then Heather, so you have a little bit of time to think about what your answer is going to be. What's changing my life this week, in the past couple of weeks, has been, I taught my kids Foursquare, which is a great playground game.
Yeah.
And I have two kids who can play it. So we actually play three square. We made a triangle instead of an actual square. But
Nice.
it was funny how quickly they caught on and just really liked it. It was like, yeah, I can see why this playground game has been around for so long. It's a great
So
game.
long. It keeps going. It's
Yeah.
fun to see kids today playing that and know that it lives on.
Mhm.
That's right.
That's so good. Well, what's changing my life in the past few months, I have started using the journal app that is just preloaded onto my phone. I don't know, I hadn't noticed it before, but just recently I was like, oh, what is this here? And what I love about it is that it is on my phone. So when I'm traveling, I don't have to remember to bring something with me. And I'm one of those, like, I would love to journal regularly. But when I journal and I go through a season of it, it's like I am writing like long, I'm writing a long prayer or something like that. So the thought of journaling is like a time commitment. And so I'm just using it for like a sentence or two. And then you can pull in any like podcast you listen to that day, music, your steps. It just knows. I mean, we don't need to
That's
get into how it
fascinating.
knows, but
Well, yeah.
it's on your phone. So it knows, right? Like and so I can just like with a click, you can pull in photos, anything. And so it's just a little collection snapshot of the day. And it's been really cool to just kind of look back, and you can, add any little things in there, like a medical thing, or, I saw this friend and, this was the takeaway from that conversation or whatever. So that then I easily forget things too, of
Yeah.
like how the Lord has worked, or, what I've done in a certain amount of time. So it's cool to then have that to look back on, to reflect on a season, to reflect on a year. I don't have a whole year behind me. So as we're entering a new year, can't look at all of 2024, but it's still been cool to look back on already.
And it's called the Journal app?
It's just called Journal. Yeah, I
Oh, just
didn't
Journal.
I didn't
Okay.
download it. It's just
Huh.
just there. So, if you have an
Fascinating.
Apple phone, so
Yeah.
Kian, we won't get into that too much with you cuz Kian has an
Thank you.
Android, but it's just there if you have an Apple phone.
That is a good tip. Good to know.
What about you, Katie?
I think for me, it's pickleball. And I know that a lot of people have been
Oh.
playing for years, but I just recently have gotten into it in the last, I don't know, 6 months or so. And what I love about it, obviously it's fun to go play, but it's such a like community thing because some days it's a couple of my really close friends are free and they can go play, but then other days I'm being introduced to other friends because it's like, well, we need 4 people. And so this friend is coming that I don't know, and this friend is coming, and then you make new friends. And so it's just, I don't know. I just think it's the most fun because it translates between ages, it translates
Uh-huh.
between new friends and old friends. It doesn't matter. So pickleball really is the thing that's changing my life lately.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
I do love that it's a community builder. I've seen so many people talking about how they're meeting all different people through that. So
that's right.
that's awesome. That's
Yeah.
great. Well, Katie, thank you so much for your time, for sharing with us, for writing these books, and yeah, we just really appreciate the conversation today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, and thank you for what you two are doing to just equip the next generation.
We're so glad that you are kicking off 2025 with us here on Transformed and Transformational. Today's conversation with Katie was such a great one.
I totally agree.
If you'd like to connect with Katie, you can visit Katy Boatman, KatyBoatman.com, or find her on Instagram at Katy Boat.
This episode reminds me of a few of our past episodes as well. The first one that comes to mind is episode 19 with Amy Massingale about emotional health and the mood meter. Amy talked about using a feelings chart, which Katie also mentioned today. So that'd be a great episode to go back and listen to if you want to hear a bit more about this.
This also reminded me of our conversation with your wife, Kian, on processing loss. That's episode 72 with Sarah Fine, and episode 46 with Annie Stepanenko about processing trauma, which can help us think about the topic of anxiety as adults as well.
We'll link to all of those in the show notes if you want to go back and listen.
Kian and I serve with an organization called Teach Beyond. Education plays a big role in missions, and Teach Beyond is a part of that.
As followers of Jesus, Teach Beyond is a global community providing transformational education services as part of God's ongoing mission to transform individuals and communities into all He intends.
Want to learn more and get involved? Visit teachbeyond.org or follow us on social media.
To help more people find the podcast and hear about Teach Beyond, we'd love it if you would leave a rating or review and share the show with a friend. Be sure you're subscribed or following the show on the platform where you listen so you never miss an episode.
And as always, you can reach us at podcast@teachbeyond.org. Happy New Year, and we'll see you next week.